Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and here not only with Bruce Fein for another Fine Points, but also with Ryan Christensen and Sticks. Sorry, if I refer to you that way. Um,
No, that's fine.
okay. Um, and I had suggested that we try an experiment so that we actually invite content creators on to participate, in some of these podcasts. So, hopefully we'll have even a livelier, more interesting discussion and invite members of the BitChute community to participate in these conversations. So this is the first of this experiment, and let's see how it goes. Okay, we're gonna, as with Bruce, we tend to focus in on not really politics, but legal issues, constitutional issues. Uh, Constitutional issues are not supposed to have not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a Republican or Democratic or progressive or liberal constitution. They're supposed to be a constitution, and supposedly the construction or interpretation of that constitution, at least by those who at least by many of the members of the Supreme Court, like Alito, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, and to some extent Roberts have claimed that they ascribe to an originalism that's called public meaning originalism. And what is public meaning originalism? It means that you look at the words that the Constitution says, or the amendment to the Constitution says, you figure out what those words were meant at the time they were written. So, and you're faithful to that construction interpretation of the Constitution. You don't impose your own interpretation onto it. You try and look at what those words meant at the times they were written, and how the public would think those words mean at the time they were written. So I think there are many issues that right now are constitutional challenges right now that have been, provoked by the Trump administration. I think it's fine that we have. I think that we find that we constantly test the boundaries of what the meaning of the Constitution is. But what are the tests that right now we're being subject to? One is, this concept of the unitary executive, which basically saying is, can Congress appoint or legislate the existence of administrative agencies that fall under the executive branch, but still appoint independent auditors of those agencies? And even though they report to the executive branch, these people are meant to be independent from. It would not be different than a company hiring an accounting firm. The executive hires the accounting firm, but ultimately that accounting firm is supposed to report to, when they do audited financials, to the board of directors, who represent the interest of the shareholders, not the CEO. The CEO, the accountants are supposed to be independent of the CEO, even though the CEO is overseeing the process of the audit. The auditors are still meant to be independent. So the question is that concept allowed in the federal government, or does the Congress have no right, that once something is part of the executive branch, that they have no right to basically appoint agencies and have somebody who's independent, a neutral party, making sure that the executive is faithfully applying the will of Congress? Okay,
yeah.
So
Jeffrey,
that's one issue.
Yeah, let me Jeffrey, give some background here. I think that's important to understand, what the framers thought. The idea of unitary executive supposedly fulfills separation of powers. The executive, judicial, and legislative branches have their own realms of responsibility under the Constitution. But James Madison, who was the brainchild of separation of powers, made it clear that it didn't mean that one branch had no role or influence over the discharge of another branch's responsibilities. It just couldn't exercise what he called an overriding influence. So we can see in the Constitution itself, there is some overlap. The president has some role in the legislative process because the president can veto legislation, and it can be overridden, however. The legislature, the Senate, has some role in foreign policy because it has to ratify treaties by two-thirds votes. So there was never intended to be ironclad Chinese walls between the three branches. And that is how the Supreme Court has viewed this in the past. I was there, Jeffrey, when Congress enacted the Independent Counsels Act of 1986. This was an act passed because it was thought that during the Watergate scandal in the investigation, that an executive couldn't be trusted to investigate itself. I mean, we've had a canon of Anglo-American jurisprudence for at least 5 centuries. A man can't be a judge in his own case. And what happened in Watergate was Richard Nixon, the target of the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, was judging his own case and fired Archibald Cox. There was public pressure that forced him ultimately to back down. And Leon Jaworski was his successor, but Leon Jaworski technically could have been fired by the president because he was just an appointment of the Justice Department. So Congress, looking at that precedent, decided to create an independent counsel that wouldn't depend upon the good faith of the president, and said, all right, when a member of the executive branch, the president or his high-level officials, are under investigation, the investigation will be conducted by an independent counsel who will be appointed by 3 judges appointed by the Chief Justice of the United States. And that independent counsel cannot be removed except for gross improprieties. Now, that isn't taking a huge portion of the executive branch responsibility to execute the laws away, because the jurisdiction of the independent counsel was just crimes allegedly committed by this very small group of high-level officials. It wasn't across the board enforcing the federal criminal code, which has literally thousands of laws. And the U.S. Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision called Morrison and Olson, said yes, that this is constitutional, even though the discharge of the independent counsel's duties was an executive function, namely prosecution. And it was viewed that because this was not the same level of responsibility as a cabinet official, that it did not require Senate confirmation. This was not a principal officer of the United States, but the appointment by judges was sufficient. So when we look at this argument that a unitary executive means that all these independent agencies, and the ones that you started to address that are exemplary, one, I used to work in the Federal Communications Commission, the Securities Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission. You have a whole variety of independent agencies where the president appoints the members of the agency, but he can't remove them at will. They have to have some good cause. And you can see what small impact that good cause removal has. The president still controls who is sitting in the agency because he has to make the appointments. And Congress can't appoint replacements. So this is a very, very tiny disturbance of the idea that a president should be in control of the executive branch. The President Trump now, and with his MAGA people, want to throw that all out the window and say there can be no checks on the executive branch's control of itself. I say which runs exactly opposite the idea that you can't trust a man to be a judge in his own case. You can't let the executive branch decide how much power it has. I mean, it's pretty obvious where they're going to come out. There's no check at all. And that's basically where we're fighting out right now, these issues in the courts. At least at present, Mr. Trump has lost most of the cases. They haven't got to the U.S. Supreme Court again. But I think our audience should recognize that this is a fundamental principle. And that I remember that, again, I'm at the Justice Department, and there was worry in the turbulence of Watergate that President Nixon would pardon himself. And we wrote an opinion at the department saying no, because you can't let a president pardon himself. There's the prototypical example of a person being a judge in his own case. I mean, how can you argue that he's being dispassionate about whether a pardon is good for the public when it's himself? And that's anyway what we're really talking about here. And I underscore the impingements by this good cause removal is really, really tiny, because the president is the Congress doesn't get to choose who the successor is. it's still up to the president. So the president doesn't have people in office that he or a president hasn't appointed.
Ryan, do you have anything you'd like to add, or any question follow-up question you'd like to ask Bruce on this topic?
Yeah, well, first, just thank you both, Jeffrey and Bruce, for inviting me on. I think, and what a great outline of this. I mean, as we were kind of saying offline before, this is such an important conversation right now, not just as it pertains to the Trump administration, but in general. We've gotten so far away from the average American, like truly understanding the inherent God-given, as I would see it, but that's the statements used at the time, but inherent rights of Americans, or really just anybody, as it was outlined. And yet today, more so, that we've been like allowed or allotted these things. And so it's important that we really understand not just, what we're discussing here, but just the entire understanding of how this is meant to be applied. And checks and balances and what we're discussing are the reason. I have a different perspective on more like a no government mindset, but if we're forced to live in something like this, that this is the best I've ever seen in history of actually trying to see an accountability of the government from the average, the masses or the other aspects of the government. And so what's really interesting is what you're highlighting is that Donald Trump is clearly going in a direction, or just his administration rather, that are trying to make the argument that there's nobody that is able or allowed to check that power, which is, like you just described, Bruce, is fundamentally the opposite of what this was meant, what was designed to be. And I just want to point a couple things out that I thought were interesting, is that from the advisory aspect of it, what's really fascinating is that Elon Musk is representing this advisory role, but clearly he's taking action. He's not just advising somebody with authority to take action. He's literally, you could even argue if he was like at this location with somebody with the authority, even though he's calling the shots, that maybe but he's there without somebody with authority in many cases, with just his team. And so it's obvious that that's already kind of superseding the way that's being applied. So he's completely within the realm of how this check and balance is supposed to go. But also that I think it comes back to the main point for me, that if you go back to something like Mayberry and Madison, 1802 or 6, I forget the exact date.
1803.
Thank you. The ultimate point is that, and this is for me where it really comes back to, is that if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. And that's a deeper conversation about whether, the first, the Bill of Rights, for example, the reason those applied is because they weren't repugnant to the Constitution. There are things that have passed and that I argue have been, but the point is that today, even if he wants to argue that that's not allowed to happen, that there are things that are happening that are fundamentally unconstitutional. So that's how the check and balance is supposed to work, is where, there's always political leanings to all of this, but where judges can step up and say, well, that is technically unconstitutional, which is ultimately their job, and to rule on that. And so they're trying to basically stop that. So I don't know how we see this as anything other than basically authoritarian rule, and hey, maybe that's what's interesting. That's why I think this is an important debate conversation. Maybe that's what Americans think we should have today. I don't believe that. But that's what we're seeing kind of in the conversation of the elitist conversation, like Mark Andreessen going on and talking about how what we need is elitists to save us from the other bad elitists. That's where they want us to think today. So I just want to lay that out to start. But I guess a question I would have in general is, if they decide, like, let's just say the rest of the check and balance dynamic, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, essentially just bow to this and allow Trump and the executive branch to just run roughshod over the rest of it. What does that then effectively cement this as the future going forward? Can that then be revoked back by another administration? And, how would that go? Bruce, you'd have a specific insight on that.
Yeah. Well, let me add a couple of footnotes first. Yeah, the two judges already have concluded Elon Musk's orders are unconstitutional because he's clearly a principal officer. He's the one who sent out this email to every agency saying, you report every 5 minutes what you're doing to me, and they're responding to that. So de facto, he clearly is asserting the role that's even above that of the cabinet officers, which is why he walks in to the Oval Office or the cabinet meetings in a T-shirt and a hat on, right? He figures they're his subordinates. But so far, at least, the courts have said, no, you're acting unconstitutionally. Now, the larger issue, Ryan, that you mentioned, and I want to go back again to the underlying philosophy of our Constitution. It basically says, okay, private individuals can do bad things, but government can do things a lot worse than private individuals because they have a monopoly of violence and they got a monopoly of money, right? So the Constitution is intended to try to handicap and arrest the government, not in all cases. You need laws against murder or whatever, but have the presumption is that the government should try to be blocked from doing something, and it ought to be able to surmount a very high level of consensus before it does anything. Because even though the private sector is far from perfect, Yeah, it's less dangerous when you're entrusting power to the government. And that's what checks and balances is all about. You can't give any arm of government the ability to operate without surviving some check by a competing branch that looks at the problem in a little different way. And if it means gridlock, so be it. That means the government doesn't have the consensus that justifies going forward. And I say, does it mean the world is perfect? No, mankind's not made of perfect timber, but it's the optimal. It's the best of all possible worlds, so to speak. Nothing else is proof superior to how we've done it. And that's the stupidity of what we're doing now. Now, one thing that I find very troublesome is that there is not a single instance in the history of the presidency or the executive power, Ryan and Jeffrey, where a president has surrendered back power that he inherited from his predecessor.
Right.
It doesn't happen. I know. I've been in the executive branch. No one ever says, oh, this one overreached it, we'll give the power back. It doesn't happen. I remember I was visiting up in Congress in the lame duck session after President Obama was elected in November of 2008, talking to some Democratic members of Congress. And I said, well, you should pass resolutions disowning some of the the Dick Cheney, George Bush assertions of power, limitless power to spy, limitless power to go to war, whatever, just to signal you don't acquiesce in those interpretations of the Constitution. And the response was, oh, Obama will give us back all our power. I said, really? It's not going to happen. And of course it didn't. Obama built on Bush Cheney and took it to a new level. And then their successors took it to a new level again. And that's why we have to be very, very scrupulous about making sure none of these things that Trump is asserting takes hold, because I can guarantee the successor is not going to give it back.
Can I say one really quick before we continue, Jeffrey?
Yeah, Ryan, I want to address some of the other things you issued, some of the points you made. Okay. One is, I do believe that MAGA voters want an authoritarian president. Okay. I believe the MAGA voters have no regard for the Constitution. They think the only way to save the Constitution, save the country, is to suspend the Constitution. Okay. I believe that's what I'm not using just rhetoric. This is what I really believe, and because the evidence seems to be there. You have Trump, saying with nobody challenging, the law doesn't apply to me when I'm saving the country. Even people who voted for Trump, if they really are faithful to the Constitution, okay, they would say, I love you, Trump, but you shouldn't say things like that. Okay. Who pushed back against that comment? I don't know of any prominent Republican. I don't know if Teddy Cruz, supposedly the greatest person, the smartest person who ever graduated from Harvard Law School, the premier constitutional genius, okay, has found that in the Constitution. Okay. I want to find public meaning in the Constitution where the Constitution says, here, the Constitution is null and void when the president asserts that they are saving the country. Okay. I want to find that article in the Constitution. Maybe Ted Cruz can find it somewhere. Okay. Or he just made it up. Okay. So, you have Trump, citing Napoleon, making statements that nothing applies to him. And you have people not offended by that. Again, you can like Trump, you can agree with his policies, but anyone who has any respect for the Constitution should be offended at that comment. And it seems nobody in MAGA is offended by that comment. So it seems to me, if they're not, it means they accept that comment. Trump is saving the country from their point of view and just get out of his way. Okay. So that's what they believe. The Constitution or any check and balance is a nuisance to him saving the country. So that's what they believe. So they believe in autocratic rule when they like the autocrat. Okay. So going back to the issue of when can this be irreversible, my concern is that actually the Supreme Court will hear all these casings, and then the Supreme Court will make rulings, and those rulings will make these statements permanent. Okay. They will make it law. Okay. They will convert this insanity into law. We already have people who believe in public meaning originalism coming up with a immunity for the president that is nowhere in the Constitution. The convention talked about presidential immunity. Okay, it came up briefly. It was dismissed. It's not in the document. It's not in the document because they never intended the president to have immunity. Okay, it's not an enumerated right. Okay, so where did they come up with this? What was the citation they came up with to justify? If you hear most of their arguments, they were political arguments. Okay, they were public policy arguments. They were not legal arguments. They were not constitutional arguments. They were political public policy arguments. So if basically Alito has been caught, I think it was Alito who was caught in a recording that he didn't know about, basically saying the same thing Trump did, that we need to save the country. So if they believe that they need to save the country and that they need to suspend the Constitution, and they're in a position to interpret the Constitution to create an outcome that they believe is saving the country, okay, then we could have codified by law these things, and then they would be irreversible, unless we were able to get elections, change the composition of the court, and a future court, did what this court did to Roe v. Wade. So, but those are things that happen rarely. So, so my concern is not just what Trump is doing. I think Trump wants to provoke the litigation so it gets to the Supreme Court, because I think he's confident that the Supreme Court is going to support him on many of these issues, and his power grab and his exertions of executive authority and his erosion of checks and balances. So that my fear is, I'd rather just Trump say these things than actually have them all challenged in the courts. Because Bruce, I don't know how you feel, but after the Trump immunity ruling, okay, the only thing that the Supreme Court showed to me is they are on their bench representing MAGA. Okay,
yeah,
not representing.
Yeah. I'm less
the Constitution.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm less gloomy. I mean, we just got a 5-4 decision that basically ended the freeze that President Trump had placed on billions of dollars of aid abroad by USAID. It was 5-4. Roberts and Barrett had abandoned ship from the conservative side. And also, the difference now, I think, Jeffrey, especially with these rumblings by Trump and J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, we really don't have to obey court decisions. They are in positions of power, and I don't think they want to be just wallpaper. So they may get a little spine that they didn't show in Trump versus United
Maybe
States.
Roberts. I don't have any confidence in anyone but Roberts.
Yeah.
I mean, Amy Coney Barrett she's already shown, that she's independent. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Could I
go ahead, Ron.
nuance to? Well, because I think it's important, and I like just what you said, Jeffrey. I wholeheartedly agree with in part of the conversation that there are people that are like not the Constitution's not it's a passing concern. It's like whatever, that's just there, that they will happily ignore that if they get what they want. But I would like to add a nuance that I think is important to add, that there's a lot. I think it's a very well crafted manipulation to get people that genuinely really do care about the Constitution, who care about this country, want to see the positive outcome, but have been convinced. And it's an interesting, and it's even a logical argument that we've been driven to a position by the deep state, or whatever we want to call the bad side, or all of our government, to where the Constitution is now what's stopping us from stopping them, right? And so these people are thinking that, well, we'll do this now until we get back to a good spot, and then Trump's the good person. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's crazy to me. Like, there's no line in which you suddenly you can't suspend the Constitution. It's an inherent dynamic. But so that's where I think they're falling for that. And so I think it's important nuance that there are good people out there that are just being played by this, but they're still wrong, in my opinion. So I think that's important. But I wanted to say what Bruce
on that
pointed out.
Ryan, I agree with you on that point. And this thing about deep state, one of the articles I wrote, I wrote that Doggy should terminate, and basically because Musk once posted a video of Milton Friedman and Friedman basically talking about all the parts of government that should be shut down, and Musk said those were wise words, and I said, gee, instead of going through Doggy, why don't you just implement the Friedman plan? And the Friedman plan, to the extent that people believe a deep state exists, Friedman would have gotten rid of the deep state because he would have eliminated all these agencies. So, excuse me. Do you see any issue of Trump suspending funding for the NSA, funding for the FBI? Is he reversing the surveillance state? Okay. Has he done anything that reduces the government's power of its intrusion, its invasion, its interference with our life? Anything? No, he hasn't. Okay. He's just taken property rights over it. He's not reversed it. If he was committed to supposedly killing the deep state, then he would eliminate the CIA and the FBI and all these agencies, and he would reverse, FISA, and he would also reverse, all the Patriot Act and all its surveillance of Americans. Anyone seeing any proposal on any of those issues? Anything? Zero. Okay.
If it's worse, Jeffrey, he's proposed an 150 billion more to the national security state, 150 billion more. And with regard
to the Take It Down Act that would allow him to take down anything, he the other day said he wants to use the Take It Down Act, to go after misinformation according to his definition of misinformation. So that's our free speech president. Okay. My criteria on what's misinformation and disinformation, I'm going to take down and criminalize. Okay. That sounds like a person committed to free speech. No, that's a president committed to the elimination of any dissent whatsoever.
And let's be clear, misinformation, even deliberately being wrong, is protected under free speech. I mean, you're allowed to lie, and that's the game that's being that's what's so insulting about all of this, is that it's just about, like you said, or both of you said, that it's our flavor of the same problem, and so they just are okay with the problem as long as it's being done by their hero. Really,
I want to interject.
Another thing. I checked with Grok. Okay, Grok is Musk's AI agent, which Musk says is the smartest AI agent. I asked Grok, who is the biggest disseminator of super spreader of misinformation and disinformation of all public figures? Okay. Grok said number 1 is Elon Musk. Okay. And number 2 is Donald Trump. I asked Grok, are the claims made by Doggy about their success? Okay. I don't feel called Dodge. I call it Doggy because it's a dog. Okay. Are the claims made by Doggy accurate? Okay. So Grok said, no, they're lying. Okay. So Musk's own engine is saying that nobody spreads more misinformation and disinformation than he and Trump, and that the claims that they're making frequently in the White House and wherever else they're making to the public are just not truthful. Okay. Right. His own engine that's supposedly smart. So what should we believe? His engine is very stupid and nobody should use Grok, or his engine is actually reasonably smart, and they're telling it like it is.
Well, so you guys will like this.
This is how absurd it is.
You guys will like this. There's an interesting nuance to that. I did the same thing, and it basically will say Elon Musk is the biggest misinformation spreader. Somebody pointed out to me, if you enter in the reverse queue and ask who's the biggest spreader of truthful information, it'll also say Elon Musk. And I tried it myself. But here's what's important, because I'm agreeing with you, Jeffrey. It's pretty clear, by the way, just my own due diligence, that they're lying about half of this stuff. But what's interesting is another very specific queue was put forward asking about the percentages based on just the last 1,000 posts. And it said generally 58, I think it was 52% of the time, it was false information. So that's basically a coin flip. But my point was, if you look at the way AI works, if he goes on and says, my name is Elon Musk, that will be regarded as a truthful post, right? Mm-hmm. So the obvious reality is he's either not checking what he's saying, and that ends up being the majority of false information, or he's knowingly lying to you. Either way, his own system, like you're saying, is showing that he's basically being dishonest. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I want to go, Jeffrey, to one point you made about the hypocrisy here. Privacy. We got teenagers going in, collecting our private information from Social Security, from Medicare, the telephones and everything under the sun. These are 19-year-olds. There's no security. There's nothing. They're just going in there and rummaging through these computer data sets here. And you're concerned about our privacy? Really? You want small government? And they want to get a profile on every one of us. They have no regard for the Fourth Amendment whatsoever. And that part of the way in which they're running the deportation program, the Fourth Amendment might not even exist. They don't have any arrest warrants. They just grab anybody. Oh, we have any papers, and then throw you out. And after the fact, well, you can sue us for damages under the Fourth Amendment. And it's utterly ridiculous how reduced we've come, to the fact that the government knows everything they want about us. All the facial recognition and everything else, all done without any warrants whatsoever. And the great irony is that the American Revolution was sparked by what? Our concern for privacy, British writs of assistance, coming in and rummaging through homes looking for contraband. And we said that was the birth of the American independence movement. And now we've thrown out that birthright.
Right.
Yes. Going back to the issue both Ryan and you, Bruce, have raised regarding doggy. Let's take a look at doggy. Okay. We had a court ask the administration who's in charge of doggy, and we've had the press ask who's in charge of the doggy. First, we had the press secretary of the administration say, none of your business. Okay. So you're not entitled to know. Okay. Then we had an affidavit saying it's not Musk. We won't tell you who it is, but we're telling you it's not Musk. Musk has no role, no responsibility. He's a bit player. He's a minor actor. Okay. So that's it. The State of the Union address, the joint resolution, the joint congressional address, Trump says that Musk runs doggy. Okay. So is Trump acknowledging that his own administration lied to a court? And if his own administration has lied to a court, what should be the consequences of an own administration that signed a false affidavit to the courts? Let's look further into doggy. Doggy was also established in a way to exempt it from the Freedom of Information Act, okay? By design, okay? So we have Musk saying, I'm going to do everything transparently, okay? Then we have the administration coming up with this convoluted scheme. It's so convoluted that they have to lie in affidavits to anybody asking them questions or just refuse to say who's involved in it. So now we have a bunch of people who are communicating with themselves in servers not controlled by the government, okay, with absolutely nobody controlling them. Nobody really knows what they're doing with the information because we don't even know who's supervising them, okay? And I don't know who believes that Trump is providing personal supervision over all these issues, okay? I think somebody's got to be a moron to think that Trump is actually checking, everything Musk is doing and checking every one of the doggy team is doing, and that Trump is personally making sure that all the records are backed up, secured, and he's testing out personally their cybersecurity measures to make sure all of that, okay? So maybe MAGA morons might actually believe that. So, but I don't even believe MAGA morons are that stupid to even believe that, but they could be, many could be. So, so going back to that, we have something set up where basically they're making changes. The people in the head of the agencies don't even know the things that they're doing. They're communicating all off government servers, subject to no disclosure obligations, nor congressional oversight, okay? And people, and then they're lying to any authority on the representations and affidavits they're signing about this, and people are okay with, or you're told that if you're not fine with this, it's because you don't really want to cut government, okay? Then the accusation is you have a problem with this because you're a commie that believes in the deep state. It's not that you want to close, that you want to limit government. You just want to do it the constitutional way and a transparent way. No, if you don't support this way of doing it and blind supporting, and every day you're not only saluting to Trump, but saluting to Musk and calling him a hero, okay, for behaving this way. And if you're not doing that, it's because you're really a commie who hates the country, and doesn't really want to limit government and restrict government and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay. This is just a lie. It's just another one of the lies. So,
but I think, Jeffrey, that one of the reasons why the lie at least gets some traction is because the institution that should be doing the oversight that Musk is doing in his irregular way is totally anemic. I mean, Congress does nothing. It watches. I mean, it's appropriations power being usurped. its power of oversight being usurped, power to declare war, to run and oversee the security state is being usurped, and there's no pushback. I mean, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, might as well be a member of the executive branch. There is really no tension there. Right. I mean, and that, I think, is an earmark of how far gone our separation of powers is. Congress has turned into inkblot. When I first came, 50 some years ago, you had John Dingell's, you had Frank Moss's, their real oversight. They issued subpoenas. They'd hold people in contempt if they didn't come forward. They were really serious, and people had to obey. They risked being impeached if they didn't respond to the congressional subpoenas. Now they might as well be catatonic. They sit there, watch, clap, and do nothing. It's really amazing. And look, even if we look at the CR that's coming up for a vote in March, it's really negotiated all in the White House. The power of the purse now has migrated over there, and it's done it by the acquiescence of Congress. It's not the executive has gone in and wrenched it away. Congress says, fine, we can't do it. You take all the responsibility. We'll go back. We'll have sinecures. We get on TV from time to time. We really don't want to exercise any responsibility. We'll hand it off to you.
Why even go through this fiction of continuing resolutions? Why doesn't Congress just say, here's the checkbook, do what you want? Because that's what it's doing. Okay?
It's about the illusion.
Because now Congress is saying we're appropriating funds, but we're spending the time with debating this. We're spending a lot of hours, a lot of effort, a lot of taxpayer money to go through and produce a budget. But the budget is just a guide. It's just a suggestion.
Right.
Law. Nothing we do is law. Okay. All we're doing is spending time making the suggestions, and the president can do whatever he wants to do. We've just made the suggestions, and at the end, whatever the president decides, we're okay with. Okay. Yeah, that's their description of the system designed by James Madison. Okay.
Yeah, I think
that's their description. Okay. Impound funds. If Trump tomorrow said, I want to check voter rolls, I want to find out who voted Democrats, I'm going to find for every donor whoever gave money to a Democrat, and I'm going to eliminate the fact that they'll never get a government contract. I'm going to withdraw every government benefit from them. I'm not going to deliver them Social Security checks. Okay. I believe this Republican Party would be silent. Okay. I believe they would say, okay, Donald, Trump, good idea. It's going to save America. Okay. And I believe many MAGA would be okay with suspending benefits, constitutional, legal benefits to people who are anti-MAGA. Okay. I believe many MAGA people would actually support those actions. I believe that.
And one of the ironies, Jeffrey, is that in the debate on ratifying the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, James Madison was saying it's the power of the purse that gives the legislature the clinch over the executive branch, because they can remedy any abuse through the power of the purse. Indeed, you may know that we ended the war in Vietnam when Congress enacted a law that said after August 15th, 1973, no monies of the United States can be expended to conduct combat operations in Indochina. End of war. The power of the purse. I mean, Congress would no more consider that today than, they think they could change the moon into green cheese. They simply, they're AWOL.
Can I jump in real quick? I just want to point something out that I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's about the illusion of this process, which I think we're all kind of highlighting here. And that I actually agree that I think what's so scary is that the people have been convinced for whatever reason that might be what they would be okay with, just unconstitutional acts. But for me, this demonstrates a very long-term invasion. Basically, what we're seeing is Congress, from whatever we're discussing, whether it's lobbyists, outside government influence, I technically think it's a combination of Zionism and technocracy. These people have been compromised. These people have slowly given up their own power over this process, and most of them have very clear, in a multitude of ways, issues that show that they have conflicts of interest, like where they're insider trading. I mean, all these different ways that they have been manipulated. And let's not forget that we have a very provable and now even more discussed today example of a sexual blackmail network that was applied to put these people in these positions. That was Epstein. So I think we have to recognize that these people have been pacified or compromised to the point to where now we're seeing this consolidation of power that to me is in the interest of a foreign government. But either way, it's to the detriment of Americans. And I think that's the real big issue. So if we decide, we're trying to discuss like why they would allow it, I think it's because it's in their interest to allow it. to see the destruction of this, to see that consolidation of power, to roll out the new power structure. That's what I really think is happening.
It is, but then you have to ask, why are the American people voting for these people? See,
Right.
I think, and again, I go back to a comparison. I don't want to, like Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. That I'm there every day in Watergate. And the reason why separation of powers worked was because after the Saturday Night Massacre and the firing of Archibald Cox, 15,000 telegrams every day pouring into the White House and Congress. This will not work. And telegrams cost a couple of bucks then, not an email, right? 15,000, 30,000 a day falling in. The American people were concerned. I remember during that period, the worry about limitless executive power. You saw barbers watching the TV, John Dean testimony. You saw it in clerks and department stores. Everybody was engaged. We've lost that citizen sense of responsibility. Everyone figures points, well, somebody else should do it, not me. That's not how the system's going to work. Congress is never going to wake up unless the voters say, you know what, unless you accept your responsibility, we're not voting for you next.
But isn't that sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like where I would read that is that Americans, like, let's just speak for myself. I'm very involved because I want to try to change what I see as broken, but I could have just as easily made the choice to check out. And I think that's what a lot of Americans are doing. They're like, look, I care. I want these things. And most Americans don't feel represented by the false paradigm. We see that in the numbers every single selection process where the majority are not even involved. And so I think they're just so frustrated. They don't know what to do to where they just, and I'm not just excusing that. I feel like that's the time to get more involved, as you can tell. But I think that's what's happening is it's been engineered to get people to stop engaging so they can then pretend that the false, selection process is what actually dictates what we all believe. And I don't agree with that.
I have some disagreement with you, Ryan, with respect to how much of this is authored in Israel by Zionists. I mean, I don't think we have a 36 trillion plus fiscal deficit because of Israel. I don't think we have
foreign policy would disagree with you, but that's
liabilities because of Israel. Okay. And I do think, unfortunately, look, I believe in Zionism and I'm Jewish, but I can tell you, I'm horrified. Let's look at. I want to avoid politics and I want to avoid Israel, but I'm going to confront your comment.
Please.
Look, Israel, helped facilitated by the United States, got Hamas to agree to a ceasefire. What was Hamas supposed to get in return for the release of and I don't want to condone Hamas, okay? So I'm not going to condone Hamas. I'm not a fan of Hamas. October 7th was a terrible act, reprehensible, horrible act, okay? Not committed by everyone that lived in Gaza, committed by a small percentage of lunatics in Gaza, who decided it would be a good idea to do whatever they did.
Who were funded by Israel. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to condone October 7th. I don't want to condone the people responsible for October 7th. And I don't want to impose collective punishment on the Gazan people. So let's look at what Trump has said subsequent to the agreement of the ceasefire. The ceasefire was pretty simple in concept. It says, Gaza, you release the hostages. Do it in phases. Let's build confidence and trust. Once you release that, the IDF will leave, okay? So that's the deal. In return for the hostages being released, the Gazans were promised IDF would get the fuck out, okay? That's what they agreed to. Subsequent to that, then they hear from Trump saying, I know we all agreed to this deal. I got a better idea. It's called Trump Gaza. You're going. You're gone. No matter what you do, okay, you're gone. One way or another, you're gone. You're gone. Period. Get the fuck out of Gaza, okay? Whether you go out voluntarily or I send Israel all these weapons to eradicate you, you're gone. Period. Okay, that's the position of the United States now, okay? Trump reiterated it in a True Social post yesterday. I want to understand how any decent human being, okay, can accept that, okay? Right. So, and here is an example where I really think that it's not Bibi leading Trump. I think Trump is leading Bibi and Bibi is cooperating with Trump I think Trump, what Jared said, great real estate deal. Okay, went down. This is going to be the Mediterranean. Trump said, great. I got my friends, the Saudis and all these other people, we'll do a great real estate transactions. All we need to do is to get rid of them. And Bibi says, okay, this is what Trump wants. Sounds good to me. I got a whole bunch of lunatics in my party, that want to see this happen as well. This is disgusting. This is genocide. Okay. How the American people how any decent human being can look at that statement, okay, and not be offended that their president made this statement. That
it's also criminal, but
either you surrender those hostages or we're annihilating you, okay? We're eradicating you. We're exterminating you, okay? So, no, the Gazans don't deserve collective punishment, okay? And further that, Arab nations put up an alternative plan. They put up an alternative plan where Hamas has agreed, to form part of a coalition government, so they would surrender governance control over Gaza, and that was not enough. Okay, so the fact is that this is just invented in Israel, and Israel. Look, this is overt. Okay, this is overt. The American people have to be really stupid if they don't vote everyone out of office who supports this plan. Okay. So this is not behind closed doors. This is not people writing checks, okay, where they're doing it, in smoke-filled rooms. This is out in the open, okay? Can't anyone think, okay? At what point do Americans have a responsibility for some sense of decency?
Right.
Jeffrey, it's not a plan. It is the definition of a crime against humanity in the Geneva Conventions. It's as explicit as can be. It is, and that's how it should have been reported. Trump proposes crime against humanity to get rid of Palestinian Gazans. They use all these euphemisms, but that's what it is.
Can I just? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done, Bruce. Go ahead.
And I believe that Jeffrey is right, that the United States has this conception that we are the colossus of the world, and it's not just a Trump concession.
Right.
It's a conception articulated at one point by Madeleine Albright, the Democratic Secretary of State, saying with arrogance, we stand taller than anybody else. We see further than anybody else. We only kill for angelic reasons, 500,000 Iraqi children under 5 had to die. It was worth it, to slap Saddam Hussein. So this is what is built into our empire mentality. And it's going to come back and haunt us. It's a matter of time. But this arrogance is totally disgusting.
I agree. I was just going to say in general, it wasn't my intention to pull into politics. I think it's an important conversation to have either way. But I think the constitutional, like you said, Jeffrey, to start, it's important to have this apolitically. You know what I mean? So my point, let's just make my point about the Silicon Valley, like AIPAC influence over politicians. Really, that's kind of what I was highlighting there, is that I think that we all can recognize, or just talk about big pharma, you know what I mean? Like influence coming from outside that is not in the interest of the Constitution or American values, And I think that's what I'm so concerned about, is that we can clearly see day to day that these people are not acting in the interest of, as we just highlighted, they have given, World War II forward. When's the last time they've approved any kind of warfare that the U.S. government's been involved in? It's just blatant that we've seen that shift, But I agree, and I'm glad we did talk about that, because I do think it's important to highlight that that's a huge influence on this. Whether Biden or Trump, how do we not see that? Blindly supporting what we all see as a crime. It's just, I think that highlights the point in itself, that we've gone a long way away from what we believe we are as this country. And I think right now, that's why this conversation is so important, is that we're kind of grappling with that. I see a lot of good Americans out there that are, still want to believe in Trump, who are beginning to see that we're moment to moment falling and drifting further away from what we should be.
And I just want to point out, Ryan, and Jeffrey probably knows this. I'm close to Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky. He's the one who votes against aid for anybody, including Israel. But he went on Tucker Carlson and he explained it to me that everyone in Congress, 535 members, except Thomas Massey, has a AIPAC minder that every day is up there and says, "What can we do for you?" Thomas won't permit AIPAC again into his office. He doesn't care, and I don't want to suggest that AIPAC's the only one with lobbies. You put up big pharma. That's why they made staggering amounts out of COVID and the vaccines that didn't work and whatever. But you're right, the corruption in the congressional branch is nauseating. When you go up there, you can't get in unless you've made some kind of donation contribution.
But it's
It's a
corrupt
plutocracy.
by design.
Yes.
It's corrupt by design.
Right.
Look, even Thomas Massey. I used to have somewhat of a relationship with Thomas Massey. Okay, so Thomas Massey asked me for money. One time I gave him a check. I like Thomas Massey. I like what he stands for. I also, while I believe in Zionism and I believe in the state of Israel, I don't believe in foreign aid. And I don't think any country should. I don't think it's healthy for us or for any other country to be dependent upon another country. Okay, if you want to be a sovereign nation, okay, figure out how to be self-sovereign. Okay, so because sovereignty starts with self-sovereignty. Okay, so that's what I believe. But even Massey, I have correspondence with Massey, where I would periodically send him stuff I wrote. Periodically means like once every 5-6 months. Okay, so I was not bombarding his
Email.
his email. Well, his text that I would send text. So I was not bombarding it. I guess maybe for him, twice a year was considered bombardment. And then he wrote me saying, I know, Jeff, once you said, you asked me why I don't contribute to politics anymore. I say, because at the end of the day, you're irrelevant. Okay. I like the way you vote, but institutionally you're irrelevant. You accomplished nothing. Okay. So, I'm a business person. If I thought that you would be relevant, I'd be happy to give you money, but you're irrelevant. I like what you're doing. And he wrote me back basically saying, I'm a brilliant person. I could do many other things with my life. Okay. But I choose to do this, and if you're not going to give me money, don't text me anymore. So basically what he's telling me is that I have to pay to play. Okay. So, so I would have been, I think I have insightful things to say. I'm a pretty bright person. A lot of people seem to respect my opinion, and he basically tells me he has no interest in my opinion if I don't make a contribution. So, what does that say? I'm not paying to play. Okay. I got the money to, okay. I want to be respected for who I am, not for the checks I can write. But unfortunately, even people like Massey seem to respect people based upon their willingness to write checks and not the content of their ideas, but the quantity of their wallet. So they're all corrupt. Him too. Okay. Even while I agree with the things he's trying to accomplish, he's voted against the budget. He wants to balance the budget. He wants to shrink government. He wants the foreign aid. Almost everything Massey stands for, I'm in agreement with. But it doesn't make a difference. I'm not paying to play. Okay. Yeah. I expect to be respected. Okay. Okay. So if somebody thinks I got to pay to play, okay, I'm not being respected. Okay. They work for me. Every time he gets a paycheck, I help pay for that. Okay. He's my agent. Okay. He is my agent. Trump is my agent. Okay. Vance is my agent. Every member of Congress is my agent, because who funds their paycheck? Okay. Who do they run to be accountable to? Okay. Whose liberty and freedom are they supposed to protect? Mine, yours, Ryan's. Okay. They're agents. Okay. They should see me whenever I want to see them. That's the job of an agent. Okay. As long as they take the paycheck. I can't have a lawyer that I put on retainer and then it refuses to see me and represent my interest while taking my retainer. Okay. They're all on retainer. They got into office. They swore an oath. They take the money. They're all on retainer to the American people. Okay.
Well, when they leave office with a $1 billion net worth, I don't think the payment they were getting from Congress is really what got them there. but I agree with you. But I'd like to take this in an interesting direction. If you guys back to Doge, what we were talking about is that where I see this going And we mentioned the administrator, which, as far as I can tell, when you look it up, Amy Gleason is the name that's being presented, and she's an executive from Trump's last administration under the Digital Services, which they just renamed to Doge. And so what's interesting is that seems to be the name being presented now, as we already highlighted that Elon Musk is clearly involved. So one thing that's being proposed, and I think it's floated, is artificial intelligence as the government. As maybe that might be what's happening right now as a test run to use artificial intelligence. I mean, he's already made this point about using AI to make it make the government efficient, efficiency movement being the precursor to Technocracy Inc. The point being that I think that's where this all is aiming. And a lot of the AI aspects are what they're rolling out. So I just want, what do you think about that? Like whether or not this is where it's going. And that brings up an interesting question about whether all of this becomes irrelevant. And maybe that's why it's starting to drift away. Once AI is ultimately leading, if that happens, does any of this mean anything anymore? It's an interesting thought.
Well, I think AI, first, it's going to get hijacked. It already is by the military-industrial complex. And I feel its greatest danger is that we'll end up destroying the species with an AI versus AI war. Now, how does that work? Most of the time, we're human beings are a little bit revolted if you have to walk up to a baby and kill it, or a woman or a man face to face. But AI reduces warfare to an antiseptic process. I had no responsibility. I press a button. They have already done this, Israel and Gaza, with regard to deciding what homes or buildings can be destroyed, and it's not going to disproportionately kill civilians, although it makes errors all the time because the information is oftentimes stale. But when you get these decisions to go to war entrusted to AI, we just put in this information and we decide it's this risky, and we launch the ICBMs or launch some other weapon system. There isn't any kind of human resistance to that. That formerly, when you had face-to-face combat, at least provided some deterrent about industrial scale killings. And I give the analogy of the pilot in the Enola Gay who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima from thousands of feet of altitude. If that bomber had to go down and kill one by one, the babies, the women, the 120, he couldn't do it, right? It just would be too much. But when you give the killing decision to AI, there's no resistance like that. And we'll have AI versus AI. It's very unfortunate that the growth in wisdom and technology generally migrates to the areas where we use it to develop greater proficiency in killing. Einstein said later on that he regretted his contribution to the Manhattan Project if he knew what quantum mechanics was going to lead to. But that's why, in some sense, the separation of powers, the checks, is so important, because the check that's necessary more than any else, the check on stupid, gratuitous wars, killing for the sake of killing, which already occurs way too long. I remember a recent book, Bob Woodward wrote a book called Obama's Wars. It's all about his 2009, the whole year has been, why are we killing people in Afghanistan? What is the goal? He has meetings with the Secretary of Defense, National Security Agency, CIA, whatever. They couldn't come up with a reason, but they stayed there. Said, why are you killing? They had, after the end of 9 months, and these were hour after hour after hour debate. What are we trying to accomplish? They came up with no answer. It kept killing. So that's the greatest danger of AI. It's going to impede on privacy as well, for sure. Mm-hmm. But when we can kill in such an antiseptic way, then the species is in real danger of preservation.
Ryan, I share a lot of your concerns, regarding AI. First, I'd like to make a comment. I read somewhere that in the early part of the Reagan administration, that Reagan eliminated like 331,000 government jobs. So if you probably take a look at how many one is, I think, is an absolute number of reduction of the federal employment. That's more so than Musk has accomplished so far. Okay. And Reagan seemed to have been able to accomplish that, without any drama, that we have right now, because it was probably done in a rational way. And it probably represented because it's a higher absolute number. But my assumption is in 1980, the federal workforce was smaller than it is today. So it probably is not only larger in absolute terms, it's even a lot larger, in percentage terms. And it was able to be done, without the drama. So we take a look, then we ask the question, when someone says, I want to make things more efficient, usually about going to efficiency is not interviewing just individuals. It's reviewing processes.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't need to look at everybody's personal information to make an organization more efficient. Okay. I don't need to look at tax returns and all that other type of stuff. I review processes and procedures, okay, to make things more efficient. It's about changing processes and procedures. It's not maintaining processes and procedures and just getting rid of a whole bunch of people who were appointed by the previous presidents. That's all we're seeing right now. All we're seeing is basically, how can we target, Biden appointees without look like we're doing that? Well, we assume that most probation people are probably appointed by Biden. So the simplest way to get rid of Biden people is just getting rid of everybody who's on probation. Maybe a few of them were not a Biden appointing peoples and they're on probation for another reason, like they got a promotion or other things. But this is just the quickest way, to just sit back and say, how can I just target Biden people? Let's just get rid of probation. So it's clear that their goal is just to get rid of people appointed by Biden. It has nothing to do with efficiency. Okay.
Yeah.
Second, when people are asking, okay, and I've asked a bunch of MACA people to make government more efficient or eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, why do you need people's tax returns? Okay. So why do you need all this information? And do you understand that people's privacy of their tax returns is guaranteed by law? So again, they don't care about the law, they want all this information, and people are justifying it because we're saving the country, right? We're going back to saving the country. We got to do whatever Musk says because he's saving the country. Okay. So why do they want all this information? What's the purpose of all this information? Is it to reduce waste, water, and abuse? By their own acknowledgement, they've reduced almost nothing. Okay. They've made claims, then they've had to withdraw those claims because when those claims get audited by the media that they say lies all the time, it seems to me that a lot of the claims that the media has made are false claims. They're pulling from the website. So who's telling the truth? Musk and Doggy, or the media that's auditing this stuff? The media.
Really quickly, I've checked these things myself just for the record. Before the New York Times articles, I was going through individual contracts and proving that some of them were still active, some of them were, just for the record. So very accurate.
Yeah. So their numbers have been inaccurate. Their numbers are not to be trusted.
Right.
Okay. And what the New York Times people and the Washington Post are doing is what we expect journalism to be: investigative journalism. That's the check and balance. Okay. So so what they want to do is they want to intimidate the media from doing its job by demeaning it and killing its credibility. If anyone that wants to challenge them, they want to kill the credibility of whoever wants to challenge them, so they have absolute authority. Then what do they want to do with this data? You got to think about, why do they want it so bad? Why are they fighting for it? What's the real application for it? Has anyone given us an explanation on why they want all this information? Okay, and why should we give all this information, not to people who are actually subject to any sort of congressional oversight, but we want to give it to people who are subject to no oversight whatsoever, okay? And have them have access to it on servers that are not government service. How do we want to turn over all our information, every piece of data the government collects on all of us, hand it over to private individuals, have it domiciled on private servers, and not be able to ask any question what they're doing with this?
That's incredible.
Okay. So
and they're Jeffrey, they're 19-year-olds.
Yeah, man.
They're kids.
So when people are doing all this stuff and they don't want to explain why, they don't want to be subject to any sort of oversight, and they don't even want you to know who the people are involved in doing this stuff, that generally shouldn't be a good sign. Okay.
And I can promise you that they're using some of this data to train their AI models. I mean, it's almost a no-brainer at this point, there's been some insinuation about that already. I mean, think about that. Trillion-dollar databases or, whatever, IRS as you're highlighting and using that to basically train with your personal information, privacy be damned, their, whatever system is being rolled out. And I would actually add too, to your point you made, Jeffrey, that it's interesting to think about, like the recent one about the cutting off the credit cards or like bringing the thing down to $1 or whatever just recently happened, like all those credit cards for the state workers. Is that fighting the deep state? Or, I mean, are we of the mind that the deep state uses government-handed credit cards to pay for their gas? No. Those are average state workers that they're chopping off while keeping what DOGE represents, if you look at the basic metrics of it, is a deep state dynamic. I mean, Strategic Culture Foundation did a great article about this. I mean, just imagine if this was Biden with a bunch of Democrat people, they would all be screaming deep state. I mean, by its metrics, by what it is an unaccountable bureaucracy, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Ryan, I've asked MAGA people, what if Biden was president? Biden announced Doggy, set up Doggy to do exactly the way Trump has done it, reproduce Doggy exactly as it's done, but put George Soros in charge, okay? Would they be okay with that, okay? And of course, I got outraged. Oh, but he's a traitor. I said, no. I said, that's your opinion, okay? You just disagree with him. So so the issue is it's not like you philosophically agree with this. It's the fact is that because this person shares your ideology, anything goes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Soros guy in the administration.
A couple of things. First of all, I don't think we have a deep state. We've been able to discuss this. It's all in plain view. You can see the abuses. Now, maybe there are a few things that are hidden, but we can see them, and we can pretty much deduce the corruption that's behind, the classified information. That 99% should never be classified anyway. But I think what we've hit upon here in you, Jeffrey, is that instead of recognizing that it's process that kept us together, the Constitution is about process, not personalities. Process, like due process. We don't send somebody to prison without a due process trial. And that's what is being removed from our cultural understanding. You got to stick by the process, even if you don't like it. I mean, the fact is, I remember O.J. Simpson. People thought after the TV trial, he should have never got acquitted. He didn't abandon trials because it misfired in one instance. You had to stand behind the process. And that's what we're totally lost. The process doesn't mean anything to us. In Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, when they're throwing their hat in the ring, running in 2024 campaign, they said, we'll rule by executive order. Just like because we can't get it through Congress. No, that maybe your arguments aren't very good if you can't get it through Congress, but you don't get to abandon the process because you don't like the results. And it really is quite sweeping. I remember.
First, I want to comment on your head. I think the bigger problem, going back to getting things through Congress, is we have nationalized interests, issues that the Constitution never contemplated would be national issues.
Yeah.
So I think we're trying to reach a consensus on issues that our constitutional design never expected would be issues that would require a national consensus.
Right.
They would require a local consensus, but not a national consensus.
Yeah, but that's
to me, that's the flaw in the system. We have a divided country, and we're trying to resolve every issue on a federal level, where really these issues should not be federal issues.
Get rid of the federal government.
The founders limited federal issues as being very few. Okay. Everything else was left to the states. Now we're leaving nothing to the states, and we're making everything a federal issue.
Yes, but Jeffrey, the reason it's up to Congress to say we're not going to go there.
Right.
And that we're going to leave it to the states. Congress should not be asserting its power. People have, complained about the 17th Amendment
and the Supreme Court also.
But really, the key in my mind that destroyed the localism was the income tax amendment. Because once you give the feds the money, they just dangle it out there and say, we're not requiring you to do X, but if you do X for us, we'll put all that money on. So they go around all these so-called federal state programs. They're not federal state programs. The feds dictate everything and say, if you want the money, you have to do it. And 99% of the time that works. You got to take the money back.
I've referred to 1913 as the year liberty died. 1913, we got the Fed, we got the income tax, we got direct election of senators. So 1913, and prior to 1913, the federal government was very, very small, and state government spending was very, very small.
Right.
Yeah.
Trump likes to refer to McKinley. Okay. Yes, I'll refer to McKinley. When McKinley was president, the federal government was spending 2.7% of GDP. Okay. In 1913, okay, when we had the income tax and the Fed, and the direct election of senators, okay, the federal government was spending about 3% of GDP. Okay. Not the current 25%, approximately 25% of GDP. And check in 1913, how many administrative agencies did we have? How many regulatory bodies? Why don't we take a look at 1913, how many things Americans really needed to go and ask permission to do, okay?
Right.
And look at what we need to ask permission now relative to what we need to ask for 1913. So
there were two regulatory agencies.
1913, Americans gave up on liberty, okay?
Yeah. But Jeffrey, the reason why they gave up on liberty that found expression in World War I, because without the Fed and without the income tax, we couldn't have fought World War I. The borrowing, the Liberty bonds. In fact, the Secretary of Treasury, McAdoo, said, there's no way we can levy taxes on the American people and get involved in World War I. We got to get the Liberty bonds, make people feel they're unpatriotic unless they lend money to the federal government. And that's why the crux at that time, we decided we want to be an empire. We made a Faustian bargain. We said, rather than have liberty our glory, we want to rule the world. We want to succeed Great Britain and extend our octopus legs everywhere in the world. And at that time, our federal debt went from beginning of World War I from 1 billion to 30 billion at the end. I don't even know a word that describes the multiplier. That's what happened. And we've never stopped. But that was the Faustian bargain we made. Stupid. We're going to save the world for democracy as we expanded the undemocratic empires of France and Great Britain by zillions of square feet or whatever, more millions brought under their undemocratic rule. And we still live with this crazy idea that it's more important to be an empire than to enjoy freedom. We got to throw that back.
Right. I'm going to add one thing, and then unfortunately, gentlemen, I'm going to have to drop off just as a scheduling issue from before, but I really enjoyed this conversation so far. The deep state point. I do say, I like what you said there, Bruce, but I would have to argue that, it really comes down to what we argue that is, right? It's such an opaque term, shadow government, deep state. Everyone's got a different opinion on exactly how, especially today. But I argue that we very clearly, if you just acknowledge that it's an unelected power structure, I think we obviously have had a deep state, that has existed behind the screen. Like even the Silicon Valley aspect is pretty much that same kind of idea. So I think it's just about acknowledging that we've had like we're talking about with Congress letting go of the power of the purse. We can see that one by one, you've seen these things drift into the private side of what's going on and influencing that. Citibank and Obama and Palantir and Trump. You can see how these things are invasive. But I think whether you want to talk about like a foreign entity, whether you want to talk about like, continuity of government, like literally creating sort of like a shadow element, like these things all represent things that I don't think Americans, like you're saying, we've drifted away from even caring to look into what's going on behind the scenes, and we're really just taking the window dressing, and but I do think that's changing, and I think it has been for a while, and I think that's why this is getting really crazy, because I think they're losing control of those narratives. So I would just say that I do think that exists. I just think it behooves Americans to question all of it, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's Peter Thiel, whether it's, whoever else is behind the scenes, question all of them. And as Jeffrey's pointing out, just because they're rolling it out doesn't mean that they're maybe Trump and Elon believe they're doing the right thing and they're being played. It behooves us to always question what people in power are doing. And I think we all agree on that, So thank you both for inviting me on. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'd love to come back again with you guys and do this.
Sure. Yeah.
We'd love one of the things, right? I'd like just to make one comment quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think talking about the deep state distracts us from the real issue, which is the state. There might be a deep state, but ultimately the real problem is the state itself. So if we focus on the deep state, we ignore the real problem, which is the growth of the state.
Focus on both.
The state grows at the cost of liberty. Okay. So whether it's deep or overt, any accretion of the state is a reduction of liberty. So I want to attack the state. Okay. So Bruce.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Jeffrey says. And the reason, it's not just mindless. The reason I go back, the reason why you have to be opposed to the big state is because it has a monopoly of violence and money. Whatever private citizens can do that's bad, the government can do 1,000,000 times worse without accountability. And that's why the framers built in the checks and balances. They said, no, the presumption is in favor of liberty and freedom. The presumption is against government. It's not an irrebuttable presumption. There's some things that have to be done. If you're attacked, you have to defend yourself, but it should be very limited. And that's this mindless, abandonment of separation of powers. We don't have it anymore at all. I mean, we vote, with virtually 3 minutes of debate on a $6 trillion budget. Are you kidding? And now there's no oversight. These wars that we do everywhere, there are no oversight hearings, nothing. It just goes on cruise control. This is ridiculous. Again, it shows how if you break down separation of powers, government grows automatically and our freedom shrinks.
Yeah.
Well said.
So Ryan, I would like to thank you for your participation and assure you definitely will be back.
Absolutely.
You have an invitation to be back. It'll be up to you.
Absolutely. I'd love to. I actually really enjoyed this. I mean, I don't think this kind of conversation has had enough today. The idea of whether just really getting into the constitutional reality or people's understanding of it. So I was honored to be a part of it, guys. And please invite me back. I'd love that.
You will be. Thank you, Ryan.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
You too. Okay, Bruce, I have one.